Hi, this is Pastor Randy, and I want to thank you for joining me for the finale to our sermon series, Wise Ones Still Seek Him. Our scripture today is Matthew chapter 12, verses 1 to 12. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star in the east and have come to worship him." When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. When he called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Christ was to be born. "In Bethlehem in Judea," they replied, "for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will be the shepherd of my people Israel." Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and make a careful search for the child, and as soon as you find him, report to me, so that I too may go and worship him." After they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen in the east went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed, and on coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold and of incense and of myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. May the Lord bless you as you read his word and seek to apply it in your life. A radio station once asked their listeners to call in and share the story of one of their most memorable Christmases. One caller, a veteran of the U.S. Navy, told about his time in the Middle East serving on a joint rescue mission with the Israeli Navy. Out of gratitude, the Israeli government allowed him a special Christmas treat. He was allowed to spend Christmas morning in the limestone cave beneath the Church of the Nativity, where tradition says that Jesus was born. When asked by the DJ what he did there in the cave that morning, he responded, "I cried." What would your reaction have been if you could have been there on that first Christmas morning? As we wrap up the Christmas story as told in the Gospel of Matthew, we're going to look today at the story of the Magi, or wise men, and we will consider the reactions of the different people in that account to the birth of Jesus. First, for some background on the different players in the story, King Herod the Great was only half Jew. That alone was cause for some of the Jewish people to distrust or dislike him. In addition, he had courted the favor of the Romans in order to be appointed ruler of the area, and although he had brought peace to the troubled area, he was viewed as one who sold out to the hated Romans, and thus was not well liked. His greatest fault, however, was his almost insane suspiciousness. It became worse and worse in his later years and caused him to kill one of his most loved wives, her mother, and 3 of his sons for fear that they would try to take his place. When Matthew writes, when Herod heard this, he was disturbed. He could have just easily have said, point blank, Herod was disturbed. The Emperor Augustus once was quoted as saying that it was safer to be Herod's pig than his son. Upon his deathbed, he had several hundred of the most important citizens in Jerusalem arrested and imprisoned with orders to execute them on the day he died, because he knew no one would mourn his passing, and he was determined that there would be mourning in the land one way or another. Instead, however, upon his death, the citizens were released, and there was great rejoicing in the land. Smithsonian Magazine reports that one of the difficulties in finding Herod's tomb was the fact that his sarcophagus was apparently smashed to pieces by someone. Just another glimpse into how much of a hated ruler he was. Next, we look at the Magi, a priestly group from the Persian Empire, formerly known as the Medes. They were the equivalent of Levites, the ones who led the temple services in Jewish culture. They were known as scholarly and holy people, well-versed in philosophy, medicine, and natural sciences. Their studies included the study of the stars, and they, like most people of their time, believed that any interruption of the normal movement of the stars and planets was a sign that God had intervened in nature in a dramatic way to make some sort of special announcement, such as the birth of a king. Scholars do not agree what the star was that they saw that inspired their journey to Bethlehem, but they clearly interpreted whatever it was to mean that a king had been born. The promise of the Messiah had not been expected to come to them. They were foreigners and outsiders, and yet they came. The chief priests and scribes were the third group of responders to this occurrence of the story of the Magi and the story of the birth of Jesus. Herod called together the religious aristocrats, the ex-high priests and the theological scholars or scribes of his day, to determine where the Messiah was supposed to be born. These were the most religious people, the ones who held the most respected positions in their society when it came to the knowledge of the scriptures and having a connection to God. So those are the three groups of people in our story: Herod, the Magi, and the chief priests and scribes. Now let's look at how each of those reacted to the news of Jesus' birth. First, King Herod, he reacted with hostility and hatred. He was afraid that this baby would interfere with his life and his plans, his power and his influence. Like he did in the case of his own sons, he decided that the best thing to do would be to destroy this child. One common reaction to Christ is to try to destroy him. Some people see him as a threat because his very existence is a call for them to do what he would have them do, and they don't want that. They want to do what they want. Some of you have found that response among members of your friends and family when you try to share your faith with them. Anyone whose main desire is to do what they want will always react with hostility to Jesus. The Christian is the person who has chosen to deny himself and seek to do what Jesus would have him do. Next, the chief priests and the scribes, they reacted with indifference instead of hostility. They just didn't seem to care. They knew that the Messiah, or the Magi rather, had come with news of the birth of what was potentially their Messiah. When King Herod was asked by the Magi where the newborn king was, he called together all the people's chief priests and the teachers of the law, and he asked them where the Christ was to be born. And they said, in Bethlehem in Judea. That seems to be the end of their part in the story, providing the proper interpretation of the scriptures. Don't you think that they should have volunteered to go along with the Magi? If you knew that there was a possibility that the one you had been waiting for hundreds of years was only a few miles away, don't you think that you would drop what you were doing and go to see? What excuse could they possibly have had? I've got church services to prepare for it. I've got to prepare my lesson for the synagogue. Haven't finished my Hanukkah shopping yet. The fact is, they didn't care. They were not really seeking Jesus. They were seeking the satisfaction that came from knowing about religious things and being honored by their peers for their intellect and authority. Jesus condemned these very types later for their pride in their position, the putting on of a show for others on the outside, while inside they were dead and empty. Jesus' most harsh criticism was reserved for people just like them. In Matthew 23, he calls them snakes and whitewashed tombs. They had begun to care more about the form and appearance of their religion than about the reality of it. What difference does it make if you're able to tell everyone where to find a flotation device on the sinking ship if you don't use one yourself? What good is it to know that the Messiah was to be born in Bethlehem if you have no sense that you need to know the Messiah yourself? Jesus would later chastise the Pharisees and religious leaders of his time for desiring power and public position more than knowing God himself. And you know, those kinds of people still exist. People who don't really care about following Jesus, but only about how they can benefit from their religious connections. Far too many people call themselves Christians, but do things that are contrary to how Jesus lived and taught. John writes in 1 John chapter 2, verse 6, whoever claims to live in him must live as Jesus did. Finally, we turn to the Magi, the ones who are often described as the wise men. And it is the point of this sermon series that those who are wise will follow the example of these individuals. We must seek him. Jesus later promises that those who seek will find him. Jeremiah shares God's promise in Jeremiah 29:13. You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart. Isaiah warns us in Isaiah 55:6. Seek the Lord while he may be found. Call on him while he is near. And on that first Christmas, God came near. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. But the people he came to save seemed either hostile or disinterested. It was a group of foreigners that were wise enough to recognize the wonders of what was happening, to seek the newborn king. And when they found him, they offered Jesus adoring worship. The foreigners in the story were the only ones who got it right. They responded to his birth by dropping what they were doing and bringing the best they had to offer to lay at his feet. Shouldn't we do that as well? Drop what we're doing and lay the best we have to offer at his feet. The limestone cave under the Church of the Nativity, where the tradition says that Jesus was born, has one thing right, no matter whether it's the real location of Jesus' birth or not, and that is that the entryway is so low that even the shortest people will have to stoop in order to enter. And isn't that the only proper reaction to the birth of Jesus? To bow down. In the words of the Christmas hymn, "Oh, come, let us adore him. Oh, come, let us adore him. Oh, come, let us adore him, Christ the Lord."